So we're preparing to stream the webinar. We're about to be live. And we are live on YouTube. I'm going to put the link in the chat just in case you want to share it out or tweet it out. We love Twitter. We love social media. Someone said, where will the recording be available? Right here. That link right there. Share it with your friends and family. If you post it on social media, feel free to tag at SciStarter. Feel free to tag SciStarter when you post it. We'd love to elevate that. We're 1 minute away from start time. Awesome. And yeah, we are starting at 6:30 on the dot. I'm going to open it up on my phone too because we love a conversational chat. We love to hear from you during these things. So if I'm presenting, I want to make sure I'm able to see. All right, Zoom wants my camera. I'm not allowing my camera. I'm not going to merge my audio because I just want this just for the chat. Okay. Cool. We're 1 minute away from start time. For those of you who just came in here, I'm putting that link in the chat again. You can share out the recording of this with others if you'd like. You're more than welcome to. I'm also going to go ahead and post the recording on Twitter, because why not? We might have some people watch on the YouTube live stream, which is always fun. All right, so let me tweet for people to join us on this webinar. Live now. And it is 6:30 on the dot, so we're going to go ahead and get started just to respect your time. For those of you who just joined us, welcome. I'm going to put the link in the chat again in case you want to share that link for the live stream of this webinar with your friends and family. We are recording this, so please keep that in mind. We do want you to say hello in the chat, though. If you have questions throughout, to drop them in there as well. But whatever you put in there, we may read it out for the world to hear, so just keep that in mind with the recording. So let me share, and we're going to present. So you are here because you are interested in learning about sea level rise and citizen science. And our friends at the Museum of Science Boston have joined us tonight to talk about these issues and to localize the issue to the Boston area. Now, we know that not everyone on the webinar with us is necessarily from Boston or near Boston. That's totally okay. The citizen science projects we talk about and the principles we're discussing are applicable literally wherever you are in the world. And even if you're landlocked, even if you're not on the coast, the IC Change project is still one that you can do. So before I introduce myself, I just want to give a warm welcome to Katie Barr and Sarah Benson from the Museum of Science Boston. I'll let them introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Sarah?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Benson. My pronouns are she and her, and I am really excited to be here today. I'm an educator at the Museum of Science, and thank you so much, Caroline, for putting this all together for us.
Awesome. And it looks like someone just said hi in the chat. We have somebody from Western Massachusetts. Cool stuff. And then let's have Katie introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am also an educator at the museum. Loud noises outside with Sarah. And shout out to Western Mass. I went to UMass, so that's almost Western Mass. It's a little bit further out there. But we're really excited to share with you a little bit about the work we're doing with Caroline and SciStarter. So we'll talk later.
Awesome. All right, and to get us started, we always like to know a little bit more about you. So we're going to get us started with some polls. So I'm going to launch the first poll, which is, have you ever participated in a citizen science project before? And there are no wrong answers. If you haven't done one before, that's okay. You're going to learn how to do one today. If you have done one before, awesome. Hopefully you'll learn something new tonight or get a new insight about the projects you have done. If you're not sure, that's totally fine too. It's okay to be unsure. So we'll give you a few more seconds to vote. It looks like 70% of folks have voted so far. We have about 92% of people have done citizen science projects before. Only one person hasn't. That's totally fine. Welcome. If you have done a project before, maybe put that in the chat and just let us know which one you've done, just out of curiosity. I find that interesting. So I'm going to leave the poll open just for one more second. So 3, 2, 1, and we're going to end the poll. Let's share those results. So yep, about 92% of people in this webinar with us today have done citizen science projects. Cool. All right, so next up, we just want to know a little bit more about you. So please select all that apply. We want to know if you are an aspiring citizen scientist, a parent of an aspiring citizen scientist, a teacher, an educator, a troop leader, etc. If you are a librarian or part of a library staff, if you're a researcher or a project leader, if you're a visitor to the Museum of Science Boston, so if you've visited the museum in the past or you're part of that museum community, put that in there. If you're somebody with a SciStarter account, let us know. If you're near or in Boston, we'd love to know that too. And if you are none of these, that's totally fine as well. Just let us know who you are, a little bit about you, and that will help us kind of tailor our presentation and know who's in the room with us today. So it looks like almost everybody is an aspiring citizen scientist. We have a few parents in the room. We have a lot of educators. 8 people are educators with us today. No librarians or library staff members. We have a few researchers. We have 1 visitor to the Museum of Science Boston. Well, hopefully all of you get to visit at some point. We have 5 people with SciStarter accounts, quite a few people near or in Boston, so 5 folks from there, and some people who identify with none of these, which is totally fine as well. So we'll give you a little bit more time to vote. Get those votes in there, select all that apply to you. Wow, no librarians or library staff members. That's odd. We usually always have library folks. Very cool that we have a lot of teachers and educators in the room, though. That's awesome. And informal ed, too, it looks like. Maybe some troop leaders. Quite a few Bostonians as well. All right, so we're going to close the poll down in 3, 2, 1, and we're going to end the poll. So I'm going to share my results. So the vast majority of you are educators. We have quite a few citizen scientists, quite a few researchers, a lot of people with SciStarter accounts, a lot of Bostonians. We have a visitor to the Museum of Science in our midst, and somebody who identifies with none of these. Great, so I'm going to stop sharing my results here. And we'll go to our next slide. So today we're going to talk about sea level rise and citizen science, but I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen because, oops, stop share. Sarah Benson is going to kick things off for us. Sarah, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. So welcome everyone to this webinar. As Caroline mentioned, this is going to be a webinar about sea level rise, which I will talk about. Then I'll hand it over to Caroline, who's going to talk to us all about citizen science, and then my coworker, Katie Bauer, who's going to talk about community forums and how this is all interconnected. So the reason that we're talking about these 3 things together tonight is because we have a NOAA-funded project. NOAA is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, called Citizen Science, Civics, and Resilient Communities. It's a really long name. All you have to really know is that this project is all about engaging the public, like you on this webinar today, all about community resilience, climate change, community hazards, climate hazards, and community forums. So we're going to be talking about how all of these things are interlinked. And this project is with a lot of different partners. So we, of course, are partnering with SciStarter, and we're also partnered with Northeastern University, NICE Network, and, of course, NOAA. So I'm going to get us started by just doing a quick overview of sea level rise. But before we talk about sea level rise, I really like to just talk about climate change for a little bit. And the reason I do that is because in order to talk about sea level rise, it's really hard not to talk about why that is happening. What is the cause of that? So this is a graphic that I like to use when I'm educating our younger audiences, but I think that it's actually really helpful and a good reminder for other audiences as well. So this is a nice little graphic that shows the difference between climate and weather. And these are 2 words that are often interchanged. And They are similar. You can't have one without the other, but they are a little bit different. So climate is something that's happening over a long period of time. We're talking about averages in our temperatures and what's happening in our climate systems over at least 30 years. We actually use around over 100 years of data, but it's talking about what is our average climate over a long period of time. Where weather, we're talking more about today, the now, our 10-day forecast. So this good graphic has the example of talking about your wardrobe. So if we're talking about weather, we're going to describe what we're putting on today. So it's about to rain here. So if I were to go outside, I would definitely go and put a rain jacket on. It's still kind of fall, so I'm wearing pants, but it's still 70 degrees here. I'm in Rhode Island and I'm wearing short sleeves. So that's the weather, that's what I'm wearing today. But the climate is describing what is my overall temperature? What is the climate of the place that I live in? And I live in a place that has 4 distinct seasons. So in my closet, I have a bathing suit for when it's really hot, but I also have a parka and snow boots for when it's really cold. That's my climate that I live in. If I were to live somewhere in like Arizona where it's really hot, or in the desert, I would have more of a desert climate, and I probably may not own some strong winter gear. So that's talking about our climate over time versus the weather. And when we're talking about climate change, we sometimes use this word human-induced climate change. And that's because our climate has changed in the past. We've all heard of the Earth's climate changing, like the ice age or something, but that happened over a long period of time, thousands of years. We're talking about our climate is changing now in less than 100 years. And it's directly because of things that humans are doing. And what are we doing? We're pumping a lot of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. The graph on the left shows carbon dioxide. That's usually the gas that we use most often, but it's not the only greenhouse gas. But we're putting a lot of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. And we're doing this through this graph on the right. And although some of this may not be a surprise to you, especially if you are tuning into this webinar today, the one thing that I like to point out is that agriculture and land use actually has a lot of our global emissions. And most of this is because in order to grow our crops and to have our animals, we need to clear a lot of land. We clear a lot of forests, we clear a lot of rainforests, and that takes away a lot of our natural environment. It even takes away those trees that are a big carbon sink that like to absorb that carbon. Another thing about agriculture that's actually interesting is that because we are now such a connected global market, a lot of our food doesn't come from the place that we live. And so one easy thing you can do when you leave today is you can figure out how you can go to your local farmers markets or your local markets that sell that local produce or foods and meats. Or you can even go to the grocery store and figure out what's in season right now, what is coming from a local area versus something that's coming from across the world. And that's one way to try to reduce those emissions when it comes to agriculture. But carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that are going into our atmosphere are making our Earth a lot warmer. So usually our atmosphere is this nice little blanket. It's a good blanket. We want this blanket. That's what causes us to have life on Earth. But as we pump more of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we're seeing our blanket get a little too warm. It's getting really hot. So we are seeing an annual global temperature change. So this is an average in temperatures of our annual temperatures around the entire globe. And we're seeing a pretty big increase and a fast increase. This is happening really fast. This is happening too fast for our Earth to change naturally to keep up with it. And so you may have noticed I used the word warming and global warming, but I am talking about climate change. And I think that sometimes we get these terms confused, like which one do we use? People don't say global warming as much. Well, I think it's fine to say either, because what is happening is it is global warming. But the reason that we use climate change is because since our Earth is warming, a lot of systems around our Earth are changing. So surface air temperature rising, as you can see up here on this graph, is not the only thing that's happening. Because the surface air temperature is rising, all of these other things are happening as well. So we're seeing extreme events changing. We're seeing more wildfires in the West. We're seeing more hurricanes in the Atlantic. We're seeing rainfall changing, not only less rainfall, but also more rainfall in different parts of the world. We're seeing our habitat distribution changing, migration patterns changing. We're seeing ocean acidification. But today we are talking about sea levels. Why are our sea levels rising? So when we talk about climate hazards, we usually talk about these 4 major climate hazards. So sea level rise, I'll be talking about today. Drought, which is one of our hazards that we don't see as often here in the Boston area, but we are currently in a drought, but we're getting some much needed rain tonight. Extreme heat, another big topic that we're working on at the Museum of Science, and we're happy to put that link in the chat if you want to learn more about our Wicked Hot Boston project. And extreme precipitation, which doesn't necessarily mean it's going to rain more days, but also means that when it rains, it will rain more at that same time. But like I said, today we are talking about sea level rise. So what causes sea level to change? I already said that global warming and our rising temperatures are causing it to change, but what are the other effects? So the one that we're probably the most familiar with is this one that I'm circling on the screen. And that is that our glaciers and our ice sheets are melting. And they're melting because we're seeing a rise in temperature. But because we're seeing a rise in temperature and we're seeing melting, our sea levels are then rising. And what's important to note is that glaciers and ice sheets are ice that sits on land. So these are our ice sheets on Antarctica, and then in the Arctic, although most of it is an ocean, the Arctic actually has some land as well. So that's going to include Canada, Alaska, Greenland, Russia. All of those areas are seeing a lot of melting. And so that's causing our sea levels to come up. One that we may not be as familiar with is this subsidence. So subsidence is that our land is actually starting to sink a little bit. It's definitely sinking in other areas, some areas more than others. And some of those reasons are that we're pumping a lot of that groundwater and a lot of stuff basically out of our ground that's causing us to sink. And also river deltas are seeing a lot of movements, not only because of current changes, but also because of building of more storms, more erosion, and a lot of different things that are causing our coastlines to change. But the last thing that's causing our sea level to rise is this thing called thermal expansion. And what this means is that as the ocean warms up, the water will start to expand. And so I have a really cool video. Oh, the thing went away, but it's from the New England Aquarium. And in the bottom, you can see the thermometer, and then in the water, or in the beaker, there's water, and you can look at the water level and see how the temperature is starting to rise and affecting that water level. And the reason that this is happening is because as those water molecules are getting more heat into them, they're starting to bounce around a lot. So as they get more energy from that heat, water molecules move around a lot and bounce off each other. And although this looks weird and maybe this is the first time you're seeing this, it's actually probably not, because one thing that we do a lot is we boil water. And when we boil water, what are we doing? We're adding heat to it, and as it starts to boil, it's moving around enough and taking up more space. We have that saying of boiling over, and that means that our water got too much for the pot that we were in and grew a little bit too much, got too much energy, and it started to boil over. And so this is what's happening in our ocean. It's absorbing a lot of that heat and it's starting to expand. So on top of sea level rise, we have something else to talk about. And those are something called king tides. Sometimes we call them astronomical high tides, or if you're in Boston, we like to call them wicked high tides. And what these are is that they are high tides that are caused by the sun, the moon, and the earth all lining up. So this is nothing that we are doing as humans, but this is something that's been happening forever, and it happens around 2 times a year in the Boston area. So this happens around March and around October. And what it is basically the sun, the moon, and the earth are completely lined up. It has a new moon or a full moon, and the moon is closest in orbit to the earth. So all of this gravity is pulling our tides to be much, much higher. And if you've never seen it before, here is an example. Katie and I actually took these pictures on October 30th of last year, 2019. And this was a wicked high tide that we saw in Boston. Even if it looks cloudy, we actually did not have any rain. We didn't have any storms present. There was no sort of surge. So this was really just from it being a really high tide. This tide, I believe, was around 2 feet higher than our average high tides. And you can see that it completely flooded areas of the Boston waterfront. So this picture in the bottom left and in the top right is Long Wharf. So usually you're able to walk out to the wharf, take some nice pictures of Boston Harbor. And you can see here that there's a trash can in place because it's an area that you're supposed to be able to walk and be around. But the wicked high tide caused it to completely flood. Here is just a road in Boston, and then here is a harbor walk. You can see our coworker Emily walking through it, and she's kind of been the face of this project. But these high tides are able to show us something really interesting. They're able to show us areas that are very vulnerable to sea level rise. So although this is happening right now, this is giving us a glimpse into our future. Maybe even our future by 2050, and definitely our future by 2100 if we don't do anything about it. So like I said, we've always had these wicked high tides, but we're seeing an increase in these high tides. And sometimes they're called sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding. And the reason we're seeing this is because we're seeing sea level rise. We've already seen at least 6 inches. I think Boston's actually around 8 inches of sea level rise since 1950. And so we're already having this increase in this flooding because our sea levels are already starting to rise. And we have a really cool graphic that kind of shows this. So we can pretend that these buildings are Boston. This is a seawall that was built, let's say around 1950 or a little later, based on 1950 data that we had. And so here's low tide, we're good. High tide, we're fine. Wicked high tide, well, that's why we built the seawall. We knew that wicked high tides happened. Our seawall's there to protect us. But now we have to add sea level rise. Like I said, we've seen at least 8 inches of sea level rise, and we're projected to see much more by the end of the century. So we have a low tide, high tide with sea level rise, and now we have a wicked high tide with sea level rise, and we're already seeing some of that flooding. And those are the pictures that I just showed you. We're already seeing areas of Boston starting to flood from nothing else but a high tide. But now we have to add a storm surge. So storm surge is when we have some sort of storm off our coast. So a nor'easter, a hurricane, tropical storm, and that pushes a lot of water toward our coast. So low tide storm surge, we're okay. High tide storm surge, we're fine. Storm surge at wicked high tide, we are at the top of our seawall. It's not going great, but now we're gonna add our sea level rise. And you may think, well, this is the future. This hasn't really happened yet. Sea levels aren't at the levels that you guys are talking about. Why do I have to worry about this? Well, it is happening. And one example of this happening was Hurricane Sandy. So Hurricane Sandy hit New York City with a storm surge at a very high tide, and that caused flooding in the entire city. And it not only flooded streets and businesses, but completely flooded the subway stations. So although this seems like we're talking about something in the future, this is definitely something that we are dealing with right now. And here are some examples. I'm going to put these tweets in the chat so that you can actually watch the videos. But this was just last week. You can see the date, September 22nd. This was Hurricane Teddy who was off our coast. We didn't actually really get hit by Teddy, but we had a lot of coastal warnings. And so this was Hurricane Teddy hitting us at a high tide, not even a wicked high tide, but at a high tide. And you can see that parts of this street in Maine and then this street in Dennis, Massachusetts was completely flooded by this storm surge. And this was a storm, like I said, that was off the coast. It wasn't even directly over us. And you can kind of see, you'll see it when I send the tweets a little bit more, but there are seawalls here. So there's a seawall behind there, and there's a seawall behind this road as well. So our current infrastructure is already starting to fail. And it's not only flooding that is causing this damage, but also once these storms start to hit, we're seeing that there's a lot of erosion. And erosion and flooding and sea level rise are all things that we are dealing with here in Massachusetts. And why do we care? Well, we should care because we don't want to see our coasts completely gone. So some interesting facts about America's coast is that 40% of the population actually live on only 10% of the landmass, and that's all around our coastal areas. We see a ton of money in goods and services not only come from our ocean, but from transportation. Millions of people are employed from our coasts or on our coasts. And this fact over here I thought was really interesting. By 2050, if we keep on the current levels that we are, around $106 billion worth of coastal property will be gone from sea level rise. And 2050 is not that far away at all. So what are we doing about it, or what is Boston doing about it? Let me share my screen to show you this really quickly. This portal was made by our partners at Northeastern University, and it shows a case study of East Boston. So here's East Boston. If you're unfamiliar with it, it is an urban area and it does lie very close to the water. And if we add, so this is a picture of it now. And if we were to add the 4 feet of sea level rise that's predicted by 2100 for this area, you can see that East Boston would be completely flooded. If we add a storm surge on top of that, East Boston would be completely crippled by this situation. And so what is the city of Boston doing about it? They have this really extensive plan called Climate Ready Boston. And it is all about building resiliency plans for all areas of Boston. And it's not only for sea level rise, but it's for all those other climate hazards that I mentioned as well. And I will definitely put the link in the chat for some of the Climate Ready Boston materials, because it's really interesting to look at. But I'm going to quickly touch on this East Boston area. So the East Boston plan is to add these resiliency plans that we like to call living with water and keep water out. So living with water would be adding things to make sure that when the sea level does rise or we see a storm surge, we're able to live with it and it didn't mess up any of our infrastructure that we really need to survive. Keep water out is more of those hard storm barriers that like a seawall or some sort of mechanism that I'll show in a second. So here's an example, a mock-up from Climate Ready Boston of living with water in East Boston. So their plan would be to add more salt marshes, more parks, and more areas that can really absorb those flood waters, and to see less of that flooding because that they're living with this water and having this green space. So it really adds this buffer from a lot of the important buildings. So you can see here they even mark up their critical infrastructures that they would need to keep safe in event of a storm. So here are salt marshes and living shorelines and parks. And then the other plan would be keeping water out. So this is an example of a deployable flood wall, and that allows during a storm, if they know a storm is coming, they can put this up and make sure that there is no flooding for those areas. And this is something that's already being done in New York City to protect subway stations in the event of another large hurricane like Sandy. But now I'm going to pass it to Caroline, who's going to talk about local actions for sea level rise and citizen science, things that you can do to help today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was so educational. King tides are so interesting to me. So yeah, thank you for educating us today. So I'm going to share my screen again. And the great thing about citizen science is it's something you can do. Stuff like this, I know it can make us feel hopeless. You think, oh my gosh, if this king tide is a preview to what sea level rise is going to look like what can I even do? Should I just move out of Boston? The answer is you can actually do something. You can help increase the knowledge base about these issues to give resiliency planners, to give decision makers a better picture, and to be an informed voice yourself about these issues. So sea level rise and citizen science. So at SciStarter, we define citizen science as a collaboration between scientists and those of us who are curious, concerned, and motivated to make a difference. I know that based on our poll that we did, a lot of you have done citizen science before, but not everyone in the Zoom room has. So just so we're clear, citizen science is super diverse. It is everything from monitoring light pollution in the night sky, to playing a video game to analyze blood vessels, to speed up the search for a cure to Alzheimer's disease, to monitoring king tides, for example, are documenting biodiversity, taking pictures of plants and animals around you to give a better picture of what animals and plants are where worldwide. Citizen science is basically as diverse as science itself: astronomy, medicine, ecology, all of that. It's basically any way a member of the public can be meaningfully involved in the scientific enterprise. And usually it's through contributing data, so going out and adding reports, or conducting analysis. So like the example I gave of that game that you play to speed up Alzheimer's research, that's called stall catchers. And by doing that, you're literally analyzing the blood vessels. But the short of it is citizen science is a collaboration. It's a relationship. You're working with the researchers to accomplish something together, to turn your curiosity into impact. And I think partners like the Museum of Science are so amazing because they provide focus opportunities for you to do that. They activate their community to come together around one particular issue, be it king tides or extreme heat or whatever they're focusing on. On SciStarter, there are thousands of different citizen science projects that folks have listed. SciStarter is really the connector between the citizen science project and the people who need help. They need you. So we're connecting you to the project that needs your help. But it can be a little overwhelming, right? You're on SciStarter, there are thousands of projects, events, and tools. But if you're part of a community like the community of Greater Boston or the Museum of Science community in Massachusetts, you're able to go to their SciStarter page, so sciStarter.org/NOAA Museum of Science, and I'll put that link in the chat as well. You can go there, and there are a few projects that have been selected just for you to get you started. And I know not everyone on the line is from Boston. You can still go to this page too, because one of the projects on there, well, actually, every project on there you can do outside of Boston as well. And the IC Change project, you don't even have to be on the coast. You can do that anywhere on this earth, this beautiful earth that we live on. So I put that link in the chat, scistarter.org/NOAA-Museum of Science. Go there to get started with just a few citizen science projects that need your help. At this point in the program, I always ask folks to make their SciStarter accounts. It helps us keep track of all the amazing work you're doing. And just for you, when you have a SciStarter account, for projects that are SciStarter affiliates, like the MyCoast project and the IC Change project, you're able to go into your dashboard and see how many contributions and when you contributed them. So I find those stats really gratifying just for my own personal citizen science journey. I really recommend that you make a SciStarter account, and you can make it right on that page, scistarter.org/NOAA-Museum of Science. So you can discover the projects and make an account all on that page. So head over there right now, minimize the Zoom window, make your account. Also on this page, we added a tutorial that you can click through. Totally optional. It's just if you're looking for more insights into the field of citizen science, so what it is, how to join, who can do it, why participate, this tutorial is available to you to click through at your leisure. And this tutorial was created by SciStarter. But the projects we're focusing on today on that Museum of Science SciStarter page are MyCoast and IC Change. So Sarah told you a little bit about king tides. Well, a tool you can use to monitor those king tides and increase that knowledge base is called MyCoast. And MyCoast isn't just in Massachusetts. Where I live in Florida, we have MyCoast investigations as well at various beaches. But for those of you who are in Massachusetts, the MyCoast investigations are really robust there, and they're managed by the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. So the whole goal of collecting this data is for you to help decision makers. So to visualize the impact of coastal hazards and enhance awareness among decision makers and stakeholders. And they have 3 tools activated for the Massachusetts area. King tides, which Sarah told you about those. You know what those are now. You're a pro. You can capture images of those and write down some notes about them. Storm reporter, you can do that any time of the year. Doesn't need to be king tide. Whenever there's storm damage and you see it, you can report it. And then coastal resilience. So you can do this when there's a storm and when there's not a storm. It's just monitoring the living shoreline and coastal change you might observe. Another cool thing about MyCoast, especially for the Massachusetts area documentation, is you can explore recent king tide reports, and you can learn some more about storm reporter reports, and you can add those on MyCoast. MyCoast is an app, so you have to download it through the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, but it is also a SciStarter affiliate. So if you use the same email to sign up on SciStarter and to sign up for the MyCoast app, then all your contributions will track in your SciStarter dashboard. So that means the number and the frequency of those contributions will track. So I'm going to quickly stop sharing to make sure my sound works. We have this video that IC Change created, and I find it really impactful to hear from the amazing IC Change team. I think you will too. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you. Oops, let's turn her sound on. 1 second. We'll present. I think I might need to move it up. Thank you for bearing with me, friends, in our new Zoom world. Oh my gosh, why? It's still messing with me. Okay, let's move it up just a little bit more. There we go.
To eyeing the weather.
All right, let's start it from the beginning so you can still see everything. That's good.
When it comes to eyeing the weather, the best expert isn't the guy on TV, and it's not radar or satellite, it's you. Weather impacts everyone and everything, so when it changes, we need to know how it's changing us and our communities. My name is Julia Kamari-Drapkin, and I'm the founder of IC Change. IC Change empowers you to be a climate scientist in your community and investigate how weather and climate are impacting the environment and daily life where you live. Sign up on ichange.org. You can use a computer or our mobile apps. You can tell us a story or take pictures of what's changing. Think of it like an Earth selfie. Each sighting on IC Change is synced to NASA satellite data and broadcast to our community of scientists, journalists, and other community members to investigate the bigger picture trends. What animals and plants do you see in your backyard today? When it's too hot to play, what do you want to do instead? What do you or your neighbors do when there's not enough rain? Or what happens when there's too much? Are bugs out biting, and is it weird to see them at this time of year? Not sure what to observe? Take a look at the investigations that we have posted to get started. Or you can talk to your neighbors and report if they've seen change. Definitely be curious about what you're seeing. We'll connect your questions to scientists and report back what we hear. And don't forget, when you set up your profile,
she was going to tell you it's a SciStarter affiliate. Woo! So I actually earlier today in my home of Indian Harbor Beach, Florida, I think I'm going to submit an observation of what I see change. And because, as Julia, the founder of IC Change, just said in that video, you can select different investigations. I decided to send in my documentation of sea level rise. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a video here. And I just took this on my phone. I downloaded that app. I'm in here as SciStarter Robot. That's my other account. And as you can see, it's an affiliate, so everything's tracking. I'll be able to keep track of my stats in my SciStarter dashboard, the number and the frequency of my contributions. And now I'm ready to send in an observation. I'm standing in my backyard. And sometimes, by the way, you can even take observations from your window. I do that a lot as well. And I'm going to write down about how the water by my dock is higher than it usually is. And I'm giving some hypotheses about this. Maybe it's because of rain. But I mean, I think that this is a worthy thing because I am on the coast to put as part of the sea level rise investigation. So I'm taking the photo. There's my dock. We got some high rain, higher than usual. And I'm going to put my location. And I'm able to flag this. So when I select the investigation down there, I clicked sea level rise, of course. And I also flagged it as unusual. You can do that when you submit it because, I mean, that water is really high. It's never that high. And there it is. That's my observation on IC change. So the great thing about IC change is they don't put your address up. So even if you do give your exact location for the sake of the science, they give you that level of privacy. And they also automatically generate the temperature based on the location data I give. And they flagged it because I said it was unusual. They're showing it in the feed as a this is unusual observation. So it's super easy to use. And the thing I love about IC Change is, yes, you know, they are tying your observations to science. You're giving the qualitative data about your experience, saying about the impact it has on human life, on your life. But you're also able to almost treat it as your own diary. So if you live in a coastal area and you're experiencing sea level rise day to day, you can write about the impact on you. And that's really valuable data. As IC Change often says, you're the expert in your own backyard. So if you all do nothing else today, I hope that you go to scistarter.org/NOAA-Museum of Science. I hope that if you're in a coastal area and you have an active My Coast investigation, that you start participating, maybe do the storm reporter, the king tides, maybe you're just documenting coastal change, and leaders over in Massachusetts will really appreciate that. Or maybe you're in an area like Florida that also has My Coast investigations. I hope that's relevant for you as well. But no matter where you are, I hope that you're able to make an IC Change account and start talking about what you're seeing in terms of climate and weather and the impact it has on your day-to-day life. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie Barr. She's going to talk a little bit about forums now. And then we have a survey. Don't fill it out just yet, but we'll go back to it at the end. So let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you also, Sarah, for setting me up here at the end of the program. Again, my name is Katie, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am an educator at the museum. I'm actually part of the forums team at the Museum of Science, Boston. So our team, instead of focusing on a specific exhibit or maybe a specific type of science, we focus on a specific type of program, and that program is called forums. So I have a little picture here of how we think about our programs. We bring together 100 to 150 strangers to discuss a novel question at the intersection of science and society. So here we have scientific evidence, social values, and also personal experience from all of these strangers. So these are things that science can decide, but shouldn't without communicating with the community that could be affected first. A question like, can scientists engineer the mosquito to eradicate disease becomes, should scientists engineer the mosquito to eradicate disease? Our programs pose these questions to all of you, everyone attending, whether you have experience in this field or not. Let's see if I can make this work. Not quite. Next slide, great. So we and our partners create information packets, and we arrange speakers to come in and share their own perspectives with you so that everybody can have kind of a basic level of knowledge to share and start from. But we want everybody sharing their own perspectives. Our programs involve a lot of listening, but they actually involve more talking and more sharing. So here we have an example of a perspective on sea level rise. Sarah shared some similar pictures earlier. This is water coming up onto a park in Boston at the king tide last year. But we know that humans can really only effectively share their own experiences and their own values. So what we as a team have done is we have researched and created stakeholder cards, we call them. So here you'll meet different kinds of people that would also be affected by, in this case, sea level rise. We have an oyster farmer, a transit worker, an ER doctor, and a local resident. So the idea is, even if you don't have an oyster farmer at your table that evening, you can learn a little bit more about maybe a different kind of person that has different values from what you would have. Through these conversations, our goal is that guests learn just as much from scientists as scientists learn from the community. So that learning is really going both ways. As part of our programs, we work together, again with our partners, to create strategies for how scientists and experts can address the problem at hand. So our examples here, Sarah mentioned earlier again, keeping water out, living with water, or maybe managed retreat. And so within our programs, we go into a little bit more about what each of these looks like. You may also hear from a local expert about what they have tried or why they haven't tried certain techniques in the past. And then we revisit those stakeholders from before and think, well, maybe I agree with one of these strategies, but how would the ER doctor on the waterfront hospital feel? Are they going to be affected the same way I am? Are they going to be helped the same way that I am? And of course, we discuss and decide even further. So here in the background, you can kind of faintly see one of our game boards that we have designed for our forums. And these boards really give you a place to maybe just take notes, but also record your discussion and record your ideas. Make sure that everybody's ideas are being represented, or that we have some notes on the side that has gotten cut off on my screen, maybe where there are disagreements. And we are able to save these as our own kind of evidence for after the forum itself. It gets pretty full of ideas by the end. So we have an example here. This is actually the Sea Level Rise Forum that you're seeing. So lots of things going on. So where does all this bring us in the end? Well, we always have experts, scientists, city planners in our programs. They are there to learn from all of you. And like I said, often they have their own experiences to bring within, for this example, the topic of sea level rise. So we do share outs. You're sharing with your table, and then your table is sharing with all of the other tables at the event. And then we kind of work with our partners to make sure that they are bringing them back to their fields, and that these decisions don't get made in a vacuum, but people are taking into consideration everything they have learned from this evening. And what about 2020? You may have noticed that there's a lot of people in these pictures sitting close to each other. This all happened before March 2020. So we are experimenting with going virtual. Tonight is part of this. Thank you so much for attending and participating. The next time you attend one of our forums, it's going to look a little bit more like what you see on the screen here. And we're very excited to test all of this with you and continue sharing ideas on a new platform. So thanks so much.
And Katie, I was actually in one of those pictures. That's so funny. And I'm going to quickly turn off my Zoom background because just for fun, I realized that the forum that we did for sea level rise earlier this year was the last place I went before the COVID lockdown. I was able to find in my backpack, because it was truly like, I left Boston and then we all kind of retreated into our homes. So that was the last thing I did. Oh, good memories. I'm so excited for the virtual one. Yes, well, I find it really useful info. I mean, I don't want to spoil the next forum, but I think for everyone who's been with us tonight, I really recommend, like, because it's open to everyone, right? Especially with the virtual forum, you don't have to be in Boston to go. Yeah, so I mean, for all of you, I see some people, some familiar names on the list. Like for my other Floridian friends, like I'll be there. You should totally come. We're going to learn a lot. And if you make your SciStarter account on that scistarter.org/NOAA Museum of Science, I'm going to put the link in the chat again. We send regular updates on the SciStarter side through that page. So if you make your account on that page, we'll be able to update you when the forum is. And another tool to do that. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time, and we're going to open it up to Q&A in just a second. But while we do that, I really urge you all to fill out this survey. Your answers on the survey are anonymous unless you indicate otherwise. So if you put your email at the very bottom, well, it'll be linked to the survey results, but we'll also be able to get in touch with you about updates, about the upcoming forum, and all of that good stuff. So I'm putting that link in the chat. It's bit.ly/sea level rise survey, and it is case sensitive. So I hope that you all fill that out and give us some feedback about how we did tonight. If you make your account on that scistarter.org/NOAA-Museum of Science page, we'll also be able to let you know when the forum is. And you won't be able to get one of these physical booklets, but you'll be able, I mean, I found it such a valuable experience earlier this year that I saved my booklet, if that tells you all anything. Someone said, I'm a Museum of Science member. Will information about the forums go out to members?
Yes, most likely. So we do have a date for the forum. It is November 10th, but we do not have the sign up page, the Eventbrite page set up yet. But once all of that is set up, it should go out with our normal marketing material. So if you're a member, you should be able to get our marketing emails, or what are they called? They're called e-news, member e-news, I think. And so that should be there. Otherwise, it will also be on our Museum of Science Eventbrite page. And like Caroline said, we will send out that link once we get it. And yeah, if people have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. But I just want to say that this was a great way for us to kind of get the information to all of you about this topic and about citizen science and what a forum is. But we really hope that you also join us November 10th, because we are doing our first virtual sea level rise forum. So as Caroline said, we put it on, it was March 3rd. So it was right before, I think it was one of the very last events we did at the Museum of Science before we closed. And now we're doing it again in this virtual world. So it is going to be a little bit different, because as Katie described, a forum, you're sitting around a round table, you're talking with each other, you're discussing plans, and you're really being together as a community. But what we're doing in this virtual world is you're going to be from anywhere. You don't have to be from Boston to come to this event. You can log in through your computer, which is actually a really cool perk of being virtual. But the event won't be webinar style. It will be Zoom meeting style. So you will have the opportunity to talk with the fellow people in the Zoom room with you. You can turn your video on or off, whatever you want. I think on is better for communication and really talking with people, but you don't want to, you don't have to. So it is going to be a little bit more of that format. It's going to be talking and really being involved with your community, and not only learning about sea level rise, but learning about what you can do for sea level rise. And then although at the end of the forum, you may just make one resiliency plan and come together as a group, and although it might be sort of fictional in a way, it's really not. These plans, as I put in the chat, the Climate Ready Boston plans, these things are happening, and there are ways that you can be involved in your community to make these things happen. And one of those things that you can do to make sure these things happen, I'll do my little plug here, is to vote. Not only vote for the presidential election, I know that the debate is on soon, and that's obviously important, but a lot of these issues actually trickle down to those local levels, your state and your town officials. So it's actually really important to look at who else is on your ballot and really figure out who else is going to be taking a stand on these issues and want to implement these resiliency plans in your community. It's not the president that does that. It's going to be your state and city planners and your local people that are voted into office. So I really encourage you to look more into that in your own communities.
Sarah, I have a question for you. No, I think that was really inspirational. All of you should vote, first of all. But Sarah, and Katie as well, I have a quick question. So a bunch of people who are on the line are educators. If they were interested in potentially applying this format outside of a museum, how would you do that? Like, how would you, if you were trying to transplant the ways of thinking and perspectives you teach in a forum, how would you put that in like a middle school classroom, for example?
Yeah, well, we can put a link in the chat of all of our forums that we've developed. So we're talking today about our climate resiliency forums. We not only have our sea level rise forum, but we also have one on all 4 of those climate hazards. But then on top of that, we have forums about a lot of different topics. So should we engineer the mosquito? Should we have self-driving cars? What else? We did community forums on housing in Boston. I'm blanking, Katie. Feel free to chime in on our other forums. But a lot of these things can be adapted and used in the school audiences. Now, we are still playing around with this virtual world, but if you're already virtual in your classroom, it's definitely something you can adapt. Or if you're in person, you can print a lot of these materials and have them read it out loud. So I will put the link to the chat of all of our forums, and they're all free to download. Most will download as a Dropbox, I believe, and some will download as links. So that's where all of our forums are.
We have a question from the chat. Someone asked, I brought my student to the museum last September. Are there plans for virtual field trips or a way to connect with you?
Yes, Katie, do you want to answer that? I can put it.
Okay, so we do have a team that is making plans for connecting with schools virtually. I believe the contact information would be the same that you used last year to get in touch. And if not, we'll send you our email and we'll figure out how to connect you. But it is the same people, but field trips will look different. They'll be virtual and unfortunately not in person. Yes, Sarah is sending all of our virtual content at mos.org/explore/mos@home. And we are going to be rolling out a more school-specific platform. It's taking a few months. Pandemic just really hit quickly. But definitely I'll send you our team's email address so that if your original contact didn't work, we can connect you as well.
Yeah, so we're definitely doing a lot of work to make sure that we're getting specifically into classrooms in the way that you're describing. And the MOS at Home link I just sent has a lot of our MOS Live programs that we put on daily, but it also has our podcast, family activities to do, virtual exhibits, and it also has a lot of the other kind of work we do, which are town halls about different issues as well, scientific issues. So all of those things should be there as well.
We have a lot of thank yous in the chat. I think people are really appreciating these resources. Cool, cool, cool. Someone said, if your prior contact's email doesn't work, email Sarah and my teams at forum_rsvp@mos.org and we will connect you with the right person. You all are so good. Yeah, Katie and Sarah will help you if you all need help.
Yes. And I will say that we have all this virtual content, but the museum itself is open. So you are able to go to the museum. You do have to get a time ticket, wear a mask the entire time, and you can still enjoy a lot of our exhibits. We don't have any educational programs happening right now, but all of our exhibits are open, and the planetarium is open as well. Time tickets as well. So definitely make sure if you go prepared.
Awesome stuff. We're in our last 5 minutes here. So if you all have any last minute questions, get those in the chat now so we can ask Katie and Sarah while we wait on last minute questions. I have a question for you both. So when we do a forum and we talk about all these different decisions that people can make, I was wondering, of all the forums you've facilitated, what are some of like the fun anecdotes? Like, are there any like fun, quirky stories or like weird results people ended up at? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
I think my favorite moments have come from our I'm going to mess up the technical phrase, but our self-driving cars forum. I can't remember if it's automated or autonomous vehicles, which was hearing from people who had worked in the car industry about how strongly many Americans identify that having a car is the American dream. And I've been living in the city and I'd been taking public transportation for 5 years. So I was like, wow, I didn't even take that perspective. So I was really enjoyed hearing somebody else with experience from the car industry sharing statistics about many people in my circle don't have cars. So hearing about people outside of the little city of Boston was really helpful. And it was definitely that moment of like, oh yeah, that's why we do this. So I really enjoyed that.
That's so cool. Sarah, what about you?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have a specific example that I can think of that was interesting, but I think what Katie is getting at is what's really cool, because a lot of times when we think about these issues and when we read and learn and even educate about ourselves, we form our own opinions because it's ourself who's reading this, and we think about ourselves, we put it in our own shoes, we don't put it in someone else's shoes. So forums are really cool because you not only learn about the fake stakeholders we give you, which are actually based of course on real people, but also you have the people around your table, or in this case your virtual Zoom room, that's going to bring in a perspective that you may have never thought about. So I think it's really cool. I do remember we did a forum with Tufts on substance use disorder, and I facilitated a table for that. And I had a lot of doctors at my table, and that was just really cool to see their perspectives and their experiences, and what they had to bring to the conversation was really interesting. So it's really cool to not only have, you know, scientists who work on the issues at these forums, but also just community members who are living this day to day, and also people who are just generally interested in this topic. So I hope that you can all join us on November 10th. We could talk a little bit more about sea level rise.
A quick plug, I'm going to put the link in the chat again for the NOAA Museum of Science page, because on that page there's a series of articles that we all did together, the SciStarter team and the MOS team, about the Wicked Hot Boston project. I think those articles, and we published them on Discover Magazine's website, those articles I think do a really good job of connecting what Katie and Sarah are saying, these awesome perspectives you get from forums, to citizen science work. Because citizen science, by collecting this data, and with I See Change, for example, sharing the impact of scientific forces on you, by creating a bigger picture with citizen science, you're able to widen the perspectives you can have, and the tools that might be in your toolbox for like resiliency planning are different outcomes that you might discuss in a forum. I think that that series we did on Wicked Hot Boston does a really good job kind of taking you from start to finish of the project, of of that iteration of the project, of how people were able to do some really great citizen science and some really sound science, and then have really thoughtful, provocative discussions in the forum. Any closing thoughts, team, in our last minute here before we go?
No, I just want to say thank you. It's been really fun.
Really hope to see you in November.
Yes.
Yes. All right. See you all soon. Oh, we have one last question. Someone says, does MOS have experts who would be willing to do some live video chats with school students?
Yes.
I will also send you our email to see if we can.
Email to that forum, rsvp@mos.org, and we'll definitely connect you with the right people for that. Perfect.
Caroline.
Good stuff. All right. On that note, I think we'll end it here. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Katie. And thank you to everyone at MOS and SciStarter who made this happen. See you all at the forum.
Thank you all.
Bye.